of every Jew's life. I'm sure some people would disagree with that, but I think that, especially in the last half year, we feel that more acutely, whatever our relationship to that land is. That should not be taken for granted, though. And I want to point to two pieces of writing that challenge the importance of the tie to the land. In 1875, 76, 77, I can't remember when, and I didn't look it up, a Reform rabbi, and after all, I think the first class from the Hebrew Union College was ordained in 1875. So this is the beginnings of rabbinic Judaism in America, if I could put it this way, early classes. And the rabbi's name, as I recall, was Henry Berkowitz. And the title of a sermon he gave was, "Why I Am Not a Zionist." So he tried to make a claim that Judaism does not depend upon a relationship to the land of Israel. In fact, I think he would go further to say that Zionism undermines or challenges inherently what Judaism actually is. I think his claim would be Judaism is much more based on moral and spiritual considerations, which can be applied anywhere, and we don't need a specific connection to the land. There is a book written by George Steiner, who basically wrote books on everything. And the title of that, I think it's an essay in a book. I think the name of the book is Map is Not Territory, which is a very arresting title in its own sense. And the title of that essay is Our Homeland, the Text. Our homeland is residing in the text, where we can experience our connection to the text anywhere. So Davies is raising the question about, is there an essential tie between Judaism and the land of Israel? And however one might balance the views, there are certainly ways of understanding Judaism authentically without a tie to the land. So I think it's important, as we're looking at what the Bible says about the land of Israel, just to keep that in mind. Because I think of the Bible in many different ways as an argument. You have to make an argument if you recognize the power of views different from your own. I don't have to make an argument that 2 + 2 is 4. Everybody agrees on that. But if I have to make an argument for the centrality of the land, then I'm assuming that there are ways of understanding reality, Judaism, without the land. And so I have to work to be persuasive. And I think that the Bible is often making an argument against an unacknowledged opponent. It seems to me the argument in the Bible for the existence of God is like that. I think that the biblical author recognizes that there are strong pieces of evidence that there is no God, or that the God that we worship is not the God there is. And I think for the land of Israel too, let me just make a hypothesis here, that the author is making an argument. Because after all, Judaism wants to be a universalist phenomenon with particularist emphases, where we don't have to live in the land in order to be authentic. Okay, so let's open our texts and let's see what we can do here. So first of all, Genesis chapter 12. Okay, so So this is obviously a pivotal passage, not only in its own right, but because it's the very first thing we learn about Abraham. So that, and I like to say that the idea of first can be understood in two ways at least, chronologically or logically. One thinks of the axioms of an axiomatic system as coming first, but also they have the priority of being the logical foundations of the system that's unfolding. So this is the first thing, but it is also the foundational thing. Okay? So the Lord said to Avram, "Go forth from your native land and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great. You shall be a blessing. I will bless you, and I will bless those who bless you, and curse those who curse you. All the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you." And Avram went forth as the Lord had commanded him, and Lot with him. Avram was 75 years old when he left Haran. Avram took his wife Sarai and his brother's son Lot and all the wealth they had amassed and the persons that they had acquired in Haran. And they set out for the land of Canaan. When they arrived in the land of Canaan, Avram passed through the land as far as the site of Shechem at the terebinth of Moreh. The Canaanites were then in the land. The Lord appeared to Avram and said, "I will assign this land to your offspring." And he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. So Avram is called, and he's called for a mission. I'll make you a great nation. I'll bless you. Your name will be great. It'll bless those who bless you, and your name, all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you, who you are essentially. And then immediately Abraham, I'm calling him Abraham. He's not Abraham per se for a while, but let's do either. Goes to the land, builds an altar there, or God appears to him in verse 7, and he says immediately, this land is not just a temporary residence. This is a land I am assigning to your offspring. Okay? Now it doesn't say what the temporal limits are of that assignment. Is it forever? How many generations of offspring? But nevertheless, this land is going to be a home for your people. So the land of Israel is on the minds of the biblical author from the very beginning. If we want to ask a kind of wild question, what are the origins of Zionism? How far back does yearning for the land go? And one could say, back to this moment, back to the first moment, back to the foundations. There has never been a time when the Jewish people, beginning with Abraham, didn't have a connection to the land. And the connection here is not that Abraham and his family settle there and make it their land through their own labor. This is a land given to them by God. And who is God? The maker of the heavens and the earth, right? The sole sovereign of all meaning and being has reached down to one guy and said, this is going to be your land. So if we think about the issues that confront us today, the conflicts in the land of Israel, the idea that some describe as the much promised land, promised to Jews, promised to Muslims. Christians have some claim to the land too. Christianity is quite different in this regard from Judaism and Islam, because for Christianity, if I'm not mistaken, it's not the whole land itself, it's particular sites, those sites where Jesus and the early disciples lived, walked, and consecrated. So land is really an entity in the vocabulary of Judaism and Islam, which is not in the vocabulary, if not mistaken, I don't want to overstate that point, of Islam. So that this assignation of the land of the Jewish people, I could say, is supra-temporal, or maybe extra-temporal. It has nothing to do with what goes on the ground in the course of history. That it's given, the gift hasn't been revoked, even though we'll see that it can be revoked by God, right, when God sent the people into exile, but there's further investigation of that idea as well. Is that exile permanent, or do the people still retain a right to the land even though they happen not to live there at a particular moment? But one could make the claim that the right of the Jewish people to the land is impervious to what goes on in history. Jim?
But the last line right before the Lord appeared to Abram,
Yes?
the Canaanites were then in the land. It's a short and sweet sentence that projects the problems from then till ever.
Yeah.
Because the Canaanites were in the land. It wasn't just a vacant parcel that they could show up and take.
There you go.
There were other people there.
Right?
And if we could for a minute put ourselves on the other side of the fence, they might just want to keep their land.
I think it's an awfully good point. So I have made a big deal out of God's giving the land to Abraham and by extension the Jewish people. And I think that argument or that line of thought has plausibility. What Jim is raising is another component of this entire situation. I mean, Herzl, I think Theodore Herzl at one point said, we need to find a land without a people for a people without a land. And that was a powerful way of putting it, it just happened to be false. It was not a land without a people. I think Herzl was arguing that it's a backwater area of the Ottoman Empire, and in fact it had no autonomous existence of its own, and therefore if you want to take the idea of people in a certain way, that you're not a people unless you have some sort of territorial integrity and autonomy on that land. And this was just a group of individuals, tribes, clans on the perimeter of the Ottoman Empire. I think if Herzl had been pressed, he might say something like that. But nevertheless, there were always people on the land. So Jim raised a very good point. This is a kind of a preliminary warning sign. Hey, yeah, God assigned this land to you, but we happen to be there too. And we have some claim. It raises a very interesting point of what legitimizes a claim to a particular piece of territory. The Bible is giving one here, a theological claim. Another claim might be based upon conquest. It's not clear. Longevity might be another claim. We have been here from time immemorial. It's not clear if there is any claim that resists alternative views. And therefore, every people, we don't ask ourselves, why do the Brits have claim to the land of England? There was a time that they didn't live there, when the Anglo-Saxons lived there, and they were conquered by William the Conqueror, so on. So every claim it can be disputed. Jeff?
Well, I think the challenge is that as we sit today, you can have a claim of being an indigenous people. Our claim goes back thousands of years. You can claim to have ownership of the land through might. We certainly have that today. You can claim that you have a claim to the land by international recognition, and states do that by diplomacy and recognizing acts, Truman and the like. And you can have a claim by international, the UN. You know, Israel checks all four of those boxes. There is not another definition of claim that stands outside of those four that people can challenge.
But that doesn't make the claim airtight or unique, because the Palestinians can make one of the claims at least, maybe more than one, that they lived there from time immemorial as well, and that many international bodies do want to recognize their right. They assume their right. It's just a matter of putting it into action through treaty, through agreement, and so on. So, yeah, I mean, Israel has a very strong claim to that land. There's no question about it. But I think other claims have some cogency as well. Would you agree with that?
No. I think you can make a claim. I mean, one can always argue. I'm not going to get violent about that. But I think one could look to time in the land and look to archaeological records, and try to find that. Certainly, people move back and forth between lands in the Middle East. But I think it would be hard to find a claim going back hundreds of years of anyone, thousands of years of regular Jewish presence that can compete with that.
I don't know if that's true.
It might not be true. I'm not an expert in it.
I don't think the archaeological finds are only unambiguously identifiable as Jewish objects. I mean, I think it's probably true. I mean, the point that the Canaanite was then in the land, of course this is literary, but it was undoubtedly true that whoever got there, who was the first person to live in the land? I mean, we can't know, but certainly we can take it back and back and back.
That's the challenge, that only Paleolithic tribes have claim to land.
Yeah, but still. Yeah. Ron?
Correct me if I'm wrong. Today's, quote, Palestinian has no direct lineage to the land that we call Israel. Today's Palestinians are making a claim based upon someone else's earlier use and occupation of the land, i.e. the indigenous Arab population, had nothing to do with Palestinians. So if I'm wrong in that statement, I want to know that I'm wrong, but if I'm correct in that statement, then I don't know of anyone with lineage to the land that is making claim to the land other than the Israelis or the Jews.
Well, look, I mean, I don't think we want to go too much further in this. I mean, this is obviously a controversial issue, but don't you think that it has a possible plausibility that those who lived on the land when the early Zionists began to move there and live after 2,000 years of not living on the land? There were always Jews in the land of Israel, but never as a collective body. They were always either a small group, individuals, and so on. National claims were unrealized for 2,000 years. after they had been expelled from Jerusalem and environs, they never held autonomy in the land, again, for 2,000 years. That's a long time, in which lots of people lived there, and many of those people could have claimed, along with the Jews, that we got there a long, long time ago. As a matter of fact, we're not going to find the original people, are we? The one about whom or which nobody was prior, and therefore, in a certain way, it comes down to what are the requirements of the current day. I used to teach courses on Zionism in which I would line up on the blackboard the claims to the land, and there are parallel claims all the way down. I mean, Muhammad ascended to heaven from the Dome of the Rock. That is a possible claim to the Temple Mount. I'm not trying to say it's decisive, but it's among the claims. My view is, let's forget to try to justify one group's claim to the land among all the groups who are living there and claiming something, and let's try to deal with the situation on the ground. And to me, I'm going to try to make this the last comment, and I'm sorry to presume that I'm the one to make it. If they don't solve that problem, we're going to have a Hamas-Israel war every 3 years forever. And so it's in Israel's interest to try to help the Palestinians establish a state, obviously gradually with conditions and protections, but unless it gets going, I think we're just in for a lot more trouble. I'm sorry to become political here, but so let's go on. I know we could continue to discuss this. I'd like to move to Joshua, the book of Joshua, chapter 21. You can see I'm roaming around here. And here Joshua begins, at least in my chronology, the issue of what is the nature of that land. The Abraham story gives some kind of claim to the land on theological terms. Now, what is it that the land is and does? So Joshua 21, and 21 is one of the last chapters of the book of Joshua, which is the book of conquest. And according to the book of Joshua, several battles were fought, but finally the land was won by Joshua and his group. And after the conquest, Joshua gathered the tribes and assigned certain portions of the land to them, and then they went and lived on the land. Conquest and then settlement. Chapter 21, verse 43. So let's start with 41. The Lord gave to Israel the whole country, which he had sworn to their fathers that he would assign to them. And they took possession of it and settled in it. So there are three claims to the land right there, given by God. They took possession of it through conquest. And not only did they possess it through conquest, then they lived on it. The Lord gave them rest on all sides, just as he had promised to their fathers on oath. So here we get the notion of land as haven. He gave them rest. It's a place where all of the comings and goings of the people, all of the troubles, can now end and the people can find peace. The Lord, back to 42, gave them rest on all sides, just as he had promised to their fathers on oath. Okay? So that they now have peace on the land, and this is what God promised Abraham. So that promise goes back to the very, very beginning. And here it arrives at its fulfillment. Not one man of all their enemies withstood them. The Lord delivered all their enemies into their hands. Not one of the good things which the Lord had promised to the house of Israel lacking. Everything was fulfilled. Hakol ba. Everything came about. Of course, this is an idealization, because when we get to the next book, the book of Judges, we see that, in fact, that isn't the case. There are still lots of people on the land. And so the issue of conquest has to be taken up all over again. So we might say that this is a mythological treatment of this issue. The myth, the story, is that the land is a haven for the people. And even though it's been idealized here, this is the inherent nature of the connection between the land and the people. And it now becomes, in the books of Judges and so on, an aspiration. And I might say that there are two kinds of aspiration. First of all, what is aspiration? Aspiration is the hope for something that doesn't exist yet. You know what? I aspire to draw a five-sided square. I really want to do this. It's one of my goals in life. Wouldn't it be great at the beginning of this that somebody said to me, hey, you can't do, that's not possible to do by definition. A square is a four-sided polygon. Okay, so I'd like to know whether my aspiration has possible realization before I go about getting it. Okay? If the people here are looking for rest, let's assume now we skip ahead to the book of Judges and see that that isn't really the reality. But they want to know, can I really find rest here? The answer is yes, you can. It's doable. You want to make a five-sided square, it's not doable. You want to draw a four-sided square, it is. Go ahead and try to draw a four-sided square. Because God has already promised it, and we have seen its first realization. What I'd like to know, if I'm asking, can I draw a five-sided square? Not only is it possible, but has anybody ever done it? If somebody has done it, then I know that it's possible, even though I may not achieve it. Somebody has already done the notion of rest on the land. So the land is a place where this is a plausible aspiration and not an implausible one. That's a powerful idea, isn't it? The foundation is laid here for the possibility that Israel can serve as a haven for the people. When you think about 2,000, more than 2,000 years, 3,000 years, Abraham is 1750 before the Common Era, let's say. When the Zionists, in the hands of Theodor Herzl, what is Herzl essentially interested in? Finding a haven for a beleaguered people, right? He witnessed the trial of, what's his name? The Dreyfus trial. He was a witness to the cryings out of the people in the courtyard of anti-Semitism, and he recognized the Jewish people are in danger and maybe always will be in Europe. Then he witnessed the pogroms and the Kishinev massacre and so on. And what his model was, the situation of the Jewish people is analogous to a house on fire with people inside of it. And what do when the house is on fire? You go in and get the people. And you say, then you don't ask what sort of life do they want to have once you've gotten them out of the house. What are the territorial boundaries of the land? What's the role of religion? Hey, you guys in the house that is burning, I'm going to take you out, but first I'd like to know what you want to do when you get out. Do you want a secular society? Let's think about this a little bit. Do you want a secular society or a religious society? No. When the house is on fire, you get the people out. And that's what Herzl wanted, because for Herzl, the main imperative was get a haven. And that's why he was willing to take Uganda from the British, because the key issue for him was haven, protection. And he didn't care where. In a certain sense, Herzl was a purist whose vision was not able to compel the assent of a lot of people. You know, there's that famous, I heard myself saying this recently, maybe here, that Herzl went to the Sixth Zionist Congress, 1903, some 1904, Fifth Congress, I can't remember, and made the claim for Uganda. Look, the British are going to give us this. The house of Judaism is on fire. Let's take Uganda. And a group of Zionists, Eastern European Zionists no less, bolted from that session, and they formed a new caucus. And they called themselves, tellingly, the Zion Zionists. Zion being Israel. We will take nothing less than the land of Israel. So if you want Uganda, then we see what you're driving at. Nevertheless, you don't have our support. And Herzl recognized that Uganda was a non-starter because a good portion of those who are yearning for the land of Israel would not follow him. In other words, they're not looking only for haven. They're looking to return to the land of their ancestors, the land promised them by God. And what did Herzl do? He recognized the error of this idea. And he went to the meeting of that caucus and apologized. He quotes Psalm 137, if I forget thee, O Jerusalem, may my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth, and so on. He essentially said, I see your point, and I concede. So that the land of Israel becomes crucial here, and right here is the notion already in the Bible of haven, that the land is uniquely, it doesn't say so, but the land is uniquely able to give the people land because, verse 42, the Lord gave them rest on all sides. So this is, not only is the land a gift, but rest goes along with the land. You can see already that the Bible is building a very complex case for the importance, the centrality of the land of Israel. Okay, let's move back to Deuteronomy chapter 26. Somebody has the page call out. What's that again? 313?
Yeah.
Okay, 313. In the Jewish Publication Society Bible. Okay, very good. When you enter the land that the Lord your God is giving you as a heritage, and you possess it and settle in it, you shall take some of every first fruit of the soil, which you harvest from the land that the Lord your God is giving you, put it in a basket, go to the place where the Lord your God will choose to establish his name. You shall go to the priest in charge at that time and say to him, I acknowledge this day before the Lord your God that I have entered the land that the Lord swore to our fathers to assign us. The priest shall take the basket from your hand, set it in front of the altar of the Lord your God. Okay, so I want to try to make the claim here that we have another idea of the land of Israel. Not only haven, but also homeland, in the sense that this is the land where one can live a full, normal life. So let's go back and see what are the components of this. Let me just mention them and then I'll see what you think about it. First of all, verse 2, you shall take some of every first fruit of the soil. Farming, self-sufficiency through working the land, a particular kind of labor. There's ritual here. Take it to the priest and go and let the priest assign it to us. And verse 5, which we haven't read yet, you shall then recite as follows before the Lord your God, when you go down to Jerusalem. My father was a fugitive Aramean. He went down to Egypt with meager numbers and so on. So there is not only farming, labor, but there's also ritual action. And of course, what does ritual do? I mean, it does a variety of things. It establishes or reestablishes a connection to foundations. It gathers community. It puts language to behavior. In other words, a community with a ritual life. I mean, that ritual life may be opening day of the baseball season. Let's go down. There are all kinds of ways to do ritual, right? Both religious and secular. But ritual life gathers community, gives focus to what a community is, and puts language to these activities. Now, this is the passage that we read at the Seder, right? And so it becomes, what do the people do here? They tell their story. So in other words, there's farming, there's ritual, there's myth. That is, how do we understand who we are through how we were founded? And that story gives them a plausible myth. I'm using the word myth not as a false story. Oh, that's just a myth. But a likely story, a way of talking about who we are in terms of our origins and in terms of what we continue to do. Ritual life is one way of asserting, acknowledging, reasserting identity. Who are we? Ellen?
What does it mean we were Aramean?
Okay, so it's not clear. It could have, the fugitive Aramean may be Jacob, because Jacob goes north, he wanders, and he comes back. It turns out that the Hebrew is a bit ambiguous. Arami Oved Avi. So Oved here is a participle serving as an adjective, wandering. But since the Bible is an unvocalized text, it doesn't come with vowels. That word Oved can be read with the same consonants, ebade, okay, which is an intensive form of a verb called the PL, which comes from the word labor. Now, if you point it, vocalize it, if you went to the Torah scroll, you would see only consonants, which means it can be vocalized in different ways. And this makes possible different interpretations. So if it's not read Arami Oved Avi, but Arami Ebed Avi, then it becomes an Aramean pursued my father. And who would that be? Laban, right? So that it could be Jacob and it could be Laban. That's the answer to the question, who's the Aramean? It's unclear. But this text, which I take it is the way it's vocalized in a standard way, wants to say it's Jacob. Because he is the wandering Aramean, and they did wander down to Egypt. I mean, after all, what follows here is they went down to Egypt. So that would seem to be Jacob, right? Laban didn't take the people down to Egypt. So context suggests strongly that it is Jacob. Okay, so notice as we move this along a little bit, let's look to verse 7. We cried to the Lord, the God of our fathers, and the Lord heard our plea and saw our plight, our misery and our oppression. The Lord freed us from Egypt by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm and awesome power, by signs and portents. He brought us to this place, gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Wherefore I now bring the first fruits of the soil which you, O Lord, have given me. They tell their story, and then they respond with an action. I want to suggest with gratitude. That is, with a feeling that they are in a good place which nurtures human striving and achievement. Okay? So this passage, Deuteronomy 26, 1 through whatever it is, 11 or 12, gives us a variety of elements of normal life on the land. This is not a passage which emphasizes haven, even though it's implicit. He brought us here. But it talks about the possibility of normalization. When you think ahead to Zionism, what is it that Ben-Gurion, among other things, wanted for the people of the Israelis? Normal life. He often said what he's looking for is harlots in the street of Tel Aviv, right? Which is, of course, an exaggeration, but it's an example of we want to have all the elements of a normal life that any people has. And you go to one of the major cities in the world and you're going to have harlots in the street. And even though from a moral point of view you don't want it, if you want normalization, this is what you have to acknowledge as part of it, even though you may want to limit it or however, okay? So this is a good example of the precedent of normalization that many Zionists, I mean, Ben-Gurion was a secular Zionist. He wasn't looking for the religious parties. He wasn't looking for a Chad Ha'am who wanted somehow the development of an indigenous literature in Hebrew, which can then be exported to the Jews of the world. That was a Chad Ha'am's view of the centrality of Israel to the Jewish people. Not necessarily as a place where Jews would make Aliyah, because the Chad Ha'am believed the Jews wouldn't. He thought Herzl's dream of emptying the diaspora and moving all the Jews to Israel was a pipe dream. They're not coming. So, and he was right. I mean, when 2.5 million Jews came from Eastern Europe between 1880 and 1924, a very small percentage of that number went to the land of Israel, right? So Chad Ha'am's view was that Israel now is an opportunity for the development of indigenous culture. Not the Jews writing in the shadow of Goethe or Kant. That's not authentic Jewish culture. What's authentic is that authentic culture has to come from the life of an authentic and independent people. Ben-Gurion had no interest in that. That's probably overstated, because he was something of a literary guy, cared about Jewish literature. But his view was the view of Deuteronomy 26. Let's get the people to normalize life on the land. Somebody had a question. Yes, Ellen?
Do non-Jews know of God's promise to us about the land?
Yes.
Well, certainly it's available to them, and many, see, I think that lots of people that are not super friendly to the Zionist project would say, yeah, I see it's in your literature, but I'm not willing to acknowledge that you operationalize an ancient text for today. So, but lots of, look, there are elements of Christianity, evangelical elements, that I think take Paul's notion that the first shall be last, which means that the first people, the Jewish people, will be the last to come around, and that the movement of the Jews to the land of Israel becomes part of what some Christians call Heilsgeschichte, the history of salvation. And until the Jews are resettled in their land, the Messiah can't come. So there's a kind of Christian Zionism. I don't want to lump all Christians' views of Israel and Jewish connection to Israel into one label. But there are elements of Christianity who would like to see the Jews return to the land, because without it, you're not going to be able to have the fulfillment of the eschaton, the end of days. Yeah. Stuart.
Who wrote the Bible?
There you go.
The Bible is a Jewish book. Its concerns are mainly the history of the Jews in the land.
Therefore,
It's totally Jewish-centric.
it's Jewish-centered, yeah. Well, I mean, one could make a strong claim about that. You know, there are elements, strong elements, maybe not as strong today as they were generations ago, a millennia ago, of what's called supersessionism. That is, yes, the Bible is a Jewish book, but the Christians have now taken on the burden and the hope of the promise to the Jews, right? And therefore, Christianity supersedes Judaism, though in some ways is a Judaism in its further development. I think the Muslims might say something very similar.
Yeah.
Do they? Yeah. And therefore, yes, the Jewish people in the Bible have possession of the land, but the Jewish people of the Bible have been superseded by subsequent monotheistic religions. And therefore, it's now moot. It doesn't matter anymore that the Bible was only Jewish, because we are now the true Jews, or the successors of the Jews. So there is that issue. I don't raise it in order to agree with it, but only in a way to problematize, to see what the problems are with certain assertions. Counter assertions are possible. And to the degree that they have power, they needed it to be taken into account when you're trying, say, to figure out not only what is the case, but how are we supposed to solve today's problems. And I don't know that an easy claim that the Jews and the Jews only got a promise of the land of Israel, and therefore it's just totally ours. And the heck with other claims. Can't you read the Bible? Can't you see that we got it? And I suppose you could make that purist claim, and the Haredim definitely make that claim. After the '67 war, they decided that the entire West Bank is now ours as well, part of the promise. Why not Jordan, Gilead? You remember when the tribes crossed the Jordan River to go into the promised land, 2.5 tribes stayed back. And they were told, if you help help the other tribes conquer the land and cross with us, then you can go back to that land. So Jordan might be now ours as well. We lived there. And so we are going to go to Gilead, northern Jordan, and we're going to knock on doors, and we're going to say, we love you. You really, you're living great lives, but you're living on our land. And we are going to, at the first opportunity, move you out so that we can claim the land that God has given us. I mean, where is that kind of reasoning going to get us? So there is a practical matter too, but I don't want to deal just with the practical
What's
stuff.
the history of the boundaries of Jordan and Lebanon and Saudi Arabia?
It's a tough question because
Was
the
it
Bible.
after the Ottoman Empire?
Oh,
or-
well, you're talking about the Ottoman Empire. Well, look, I mean, even the Bible has different views of from the river to the mountain. It's not exactly how it's said. From the Nile to Mount Hermon, which is in Lebanon. I mean, that's one of the, David extended the boundaries. I can't remember what the outlines are. So the Bible does not speak with one voice about boundaries. You know, and you may know that after World War I, how does this work? When the conquering countries then assumed control of the land,
Right.
initially the British, what I'm about to say I'm not really sure of, but something like this. They were going to give the Jews a part of the land as well as eastern part, the east of the Jordan River, Jordan itself. Until in 1922, there was written what's called the Churchill Memorandum, which says anything east of the Jordan is no longer available to the Zionists. So initially, what was promised to the Zionists was even greater. One of the problems with this whole thing is that the British tilt to the Zionists in World War I may very well have been motivated by a desire to get Jewish support for their side in World War I. And they really didn't mean to implement it once the war was won. There is some duplicity there. So it's a very complicated matter. Okay, let's turn to another passage, and this is Leviticus chapter 25. Leviticus 25,
Page 195.
195. So, the Lord spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, "Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land that I assign you, the land shall observe a Sabbath of the Lord. 6 years may you sow your field, and 6 years you may prune your vineyard and gather it in its yield. But in the seventh year, the land shall have a Sabbath of complete rest, a Sabbath of the Lord. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. You shall not reap the aftergrowth of your harvest or gather the grapes of your untrimmed vines. It shall be a year of complete rest for the land." Notice what this suggests. It's a personification of the land, which itself has its own rhythms. So the land itself has a kind of inherent sanctity. After all, what is the land doing? The land is observing Sabbaths. So the land itself here, I think the claim is that the land not only has an inherent personality, independence, integrity of its own, that the violation of which by whoever lives on that land becomes a very deep problem, because you're not acknowledging the independent value and rhythms of the land itself. Okay? So the land itself is not simply an instrument for normal life on the land, or an instrument for the rest, R-E-S-T, of the people. It itself has a kind of personality, integrity, autonomy, which is ritualized. The land itself needs to rest every 7 years. It's not just a matter of, let's get together and enact a law that every 7 years we're not going to plow, reap, or sow. Okay. No, that is not how it works. How it works is even before you got there, though it's not saying this way, the land itself was an entity which has its own ways of being, and you guys who are living on it better acknowledge that, or else you are going to be sorry. As a matter of fact, I forgot to notice this myself when I was working on this early this morning, that it says somewhere, I'd love to find the place, where if you don't do the right thing on the land is going to regurgitate you. The land, you are going to make the land sick to its stomach, and it's going to throw you up the way individuals throw up when they're sick to their stomachs. That's how bad it's going to be if you violate the norms of the land itself. So this is another element of the complexity of the land, inherent holiness, which needs to be acknowledged, which is why certain elements today are trying to find a way, maybe they have found a way, it seems to me they have found a way for their community, to observe the various laws of the land. The land should rest every 7 years and so on. Why do they want to do this? Well, they just love the idea. No. If you're going to live authentically on the land, you have to let it rest every 7 years. Otherwise, you're violating the land's integrity, and you're going to pay for that. That's that idea of restoring the status quo ante, the way it was in the past. Okay. The inherent sanctity of the land. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 6. Verse 1.
Page 284.
284. And this is the instruction, the laws and the rules that the Lord your God has commanded me to impart to you, to be observed in the land that you are about to cross into and occupy, so that you, your children, and your children's children may revere the Lord your God. So let's just look at that. When you come into the land, you have some obligations there. And those obligations have consequences. If you do the right thing, and now I'm going to quote verse 2, so that, that's the logic of consequence, in order that you and your children and your children's children may revere the Lord your God. Revering the Lord your God is an activity of holiness, of making holy. Okay? So here, the land is seen not as inherently holy. It's not being denied. We're putting together different elements. We're not saying that element 3 surmounts element 2. It's another element. We've just looked at the inherent holiness of the land, which has a life of its own. But here the land is an instrument for holiness. Here the land has instrumental value. If when you live on the land you follow what you are obligated to do, the consequence will be so that you and your children and your children's children may revere the Lord your God and follow as long as you live all his laws and commandments and so on. If you do the right thing, you will attain the privilege of worshiping God. Now, it doesn't say uniquely, it doesn't say, and no other place. But it does say that the land has a kind of special quality that enables the pursuit of holiness. Obey, verse 3, O Israel, willingly and faithfully, so that it may go well with you. This is all consequentialist language. Obedience, following the law, it doesn't deny that it has inherent meaning. Follow the law for its own sake. It doesn't deny that. But it says that if you follow the law, there will be salutary consequences. Obey, O Israel, willingly and faithfully, so that it may go well with you, and so that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, spoke to you. Okay? So verses 1 through 3, I want to go on with this a little bit. Verses 1 through 3 feature a couple of elements. The centrality of the land to the life of the people. Because in a way, the land here, though not a necessary condition for holiness, for consequences, certainly becomes a sufficient condition. If you do follow the laws, certain things happen on this land. Okay? If then. So then if we move to verse 4, which is the Viahafta, we see that those elements are, I want to say, though I have no evidence for this, deliberately ignored. Because look what verse 4 through 9 says. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. Now, in the philosophy of verses 1 through 3, this would be followed by, so that a variety of good things will happen to you. And by the way, on the land, the verses 1 through 3 is saturated with land-centeredness. You shall, let's note the absence of those two features, land, or as we might say, territorial particularity, that this land has features and possibilities that other places may not have. It doesn't say this, but it certainly is focusing on the role of land, this land. So, 4 through 9 avoids land-centeredness, and it avoids consequentialist language. You shall love the Lord your God. How? With all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. In other words, not love the Lord your God so that, but love the Lord your God intensely and without qualification. With all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might is adverbial. It's the how. Take to heart these instructions with it I charge you to this day. Impress them on your children. Recite them when you stay at home and when you are away. Okay? Everywhere. When you lie down and when you get up. All the time. Okay? With intensity. Everywhere. Every time. In other words, this passage already is going for absolutization of our obligations. There is never a place or a time that this system, I might say, doesn't mean to have impact on your life. Now, the question is for commentators, does it mean everywhere and every time overtly? This is all I can do with my life? Is every single day that? Or is it in some sense covert or tacit? This should be the foundation of what I do, not necessarily what I actually do. Bind them as a sign on your hand. Let them serve as a symbol on your forehead, or as we might say, deeds and thoughts. Inscribe on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. The very liminal area of your life, the threshold between home and away from home, privacy and public, family and community. I mean, it's a remarkable passage, isn't it? For its comprehensiveness, which so far says nothing about where, land, and says nothing about what you'll get if you do it. Because I think this passage can be read as different from 1 through 3 in the additional sense that there are two ways of doing the right thing, at least. For a reward or because you get the point. Doing it for its own sake. And 4 through 9 is the latter, and 1 through 3 is the former. And both are necessary, aren't they? I mean, I don't necessarily do everything that... Now, the bat mitzvah kid that I'm going to be, whose service I'm going to be doing in a few minutes, in her Devar Torah, talks about what is this ceremony all about. And she makes 2 points. Because my parents want me to do it. And because I want to do it, that's what I want to develop. Because somebody else wants me to do it, which is other-directed or maybe consequentialist, what will happen if I don't do it? Maybe they won't be happy and they'll reduce my allowance. But if I want to do it, and I want to do it because I get the point, that is doing something for its own sake. I mean, she gets that point dimly in a certain way. But she'll reflect on it over the years, and she'll come to see, wow, I got this distinction. Now, so we get to verse 10. When the Lord your God brings you into the land that he swore to your fathers, Abraham, Micah, and Jacob, great and flourishing cities you didn't build, houses full of good things that you didn't, and so on, and you eat your fill, verse 12. Take heed that you don't forget the Lord who freed you from the land. Revere only the Lord, and so on and so on. Back to land and consequentialist action. And you can imagine the rabbis 2,000 years ago sitting around a table and saying, how should we put together the worship service? What should we do here? We need to point to the universality of this religion, that it's not bound to particular lands. And we want to try to get the people to strive to see the point of these laws, and not just that it will redound to their benefit. In other words, what's the difference between the two? Doing something for its own sake, let's assume just for simplicity's sake that this means doing what God commands. If you do it for its own sake, this is an illustration of a theocentric universe. God at the center, and we orbit around that. If I'm doing it for consequences, this is a model of a homeocentric interest of universe. It's for me. What are these laws for? What these laws are for is for me to follow them in order that I get some goodies. So they're two very different worldviews between 1 and 3 and 10 and beyond, on the one hand, and the V'ahavta on the other. The V'ahavta is a theocentric model, isn't it? Where it's just the right thing to do. And I've got to do it with everything I have at every place at all times. So I'm an observer now to the rabbis. And I'm wondering myself, I'm sitting on the side, I'm watching them. They're looking for the centerpiece of the service. What are they going to choose? I ask myself, what are they going to choose? And finally they decide, chapter 6, verses 4 through 9. And I'm stunned, because they found just the right thing. exalted goal of any system, to see the point of doing the right thing, and that you can do it anywhere. It doesn't have to be in the land of Israel. 1 through 3 is land of Israel. 4 through 9 is not. The rabbis here have become universalists. Not that they eschew or put aside the land of Israel. Isn't it quite a remarkable achievement of the rabbis to do the Shema Nevi'ahavta right at the center? Maya?
I was just going back to what Stuart said, that this is a book about the Jews, for the Jews, but at the same time, when it was compiled, Israel, the Jews underwent exiles already. So I think that this is kind of a testimony. We are entitled, despite of the exile, this is our source. So this is kind of an argument for the validity of settling in the homeland.
Oh, I didn't think you were going to conclude like that.
Do it your way.
No. Because I was going to say, that sounds like George Steinbrenner, our homeland, the text, that we are a people that has wandered away from the land with our homeland in our hands, which is the text itself. That's not the move you made. You made the move that, and this shows the centrality of the land itself, because I take it what you mean is we're taking this book into exile, which is encouraging us to continue to yearn for return. And that's a part of it. That's a part of it. I mean, when you think about what the Jews accomplished for 2,000 years of exile, is keeping the land in their minds and expressing their yearning for the land 3 times a day, every single day, and 4 times on Shabbat. The middle prayers of the Amidah, for example, the restoring of the people, of our judges, of the king, of Jerusalem. And that kept the Jewish people's tie to the land alive for 2,000 years. I mean, my grandmother migrated from Hungary in like 1890. By 1896, she had no interest in going back. She told some stories about the past, but it had nothing to do with, this is my land forever, and I'm hoping to get back, and if I can't get back, I hope my children and grandchildren will get back. So I think Maya's got a very good point. This book that we carried into exile kept alive the yearning for the land as the ideal place for us to be. Yeah, it can go both ways. Michael?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could comment on Deuteronomy 6, verses 17 through 18, because first of all, as you know, I've been debating this question of the third paragraph in the V'Ahavta, which is the Reformed prayer book.
Yes.
Not in the conservative or Orthodox or Bethel prayer book.
Yes.
And it's the, we say, thus you shall remember the commandments, right? And
Yeah.
that's the root of that in the Torah appears to be verse 17. Be sure to keep the commandments, decrees, and laws that the Lord your God has enjoined upon you. So that's my first question. But then in number 18, it does return to the land. And it says something that in contemporary language might be a little bit objectionable. We should drive the other folks out, so to speak. But it also comes back to the earlier sort of question or comment I had, which is in your earlier citations from the Torah, it seems to imply that one of these 4 or 5 or 6 different reasons why the land is important for Jews is that God is saying it's not yours to be given you, but as you said, assigned to you for religious use. And thus, the only religious argument for why Jews should be able to return to the land of Israel is for religious use, just like the property tax exemption on this synagogue is not because the temple owns it, but under the law for religious use in Ohio. So once we cease doing things that are religious, we don't have that claim to the land, and to what extent is Israel religious at this point?
I'm not following your question. Say it again.
Well, the second question is that isn't what you're saying that one of the reasons that God gave the land of Israel to us is for religious use, as you put it, for ritual, and it's really only temporary. I mean, the previous Leviticus chapter is all about the festival of booths. Things are temporary
Okay.
in so many ways. which in verse 18, he implies, we'll just wipe you off the face of the earth.
Yeah.
You know, follow our religious precepts that we're supposed to follow.
Okay.
Not only will you not have use of the land, you'll be wiped off the face of the earth.
Yes, and so what point, what's the in other words, that logic seems very clear.
Yes.
So what point are you raising? Not about
I'm saying
clarity.
that according to the Torah, we need to use this land for, in a way that pleases God, in the sight of God, that we're doing it in a way that's pleasing to God. Otherwise, he may change his mind, it won't be our land anymore.
Good. Okay, so that's one powerful way of understanding the importance of the land and our behavior on it.
Yes.
And so you raise it in order just to highlight the power of that idea. It's among the other ideas,
Right.
homeland and so on, normalization, rest, that this is a place of refuge.
I raise it only for religious purposes, but since you said political, I'm reading I.F. Stone's book, Underground in Palestine now. It is just heart-rending, as he describes the people with whom my father worked as an Army UNRWA captain, the displaced persons. They weren't going there for, some of them, very few of them, a minority, were going for religious purposes.
Yes.
They were refugees.
Yes.
They were trying to find a place where they could survive. So that's another reason to have a land of your own too. So there's many reasons, like the other person said here, many reasons why there's a claim to the land of Israel. But I was focusing on the religious one.
So what you're pointing out is, though there are many reasons, passages like this focus on the prime reason, which has to do with religion, because if you don't follow the commandments, then the punishments are really quite severe.
Yes.
The land will regurgitate you, and you'll find yourself in the, yeah. So are you saying, Michael, that therefore the religious component of the land of Israel, among the different components, homeland, haven, and so on, is the primary one? Are you saying that?
No, I'm not saying that. That would be that would be making some kind of serious philosophical error, which I'm not even sure I can define. But I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying God in some ways is trying to give us hope, as you said earlier. Hope for salvation, hope for, return of the Messiah, etc. It's linked to our hope to survive, our hope to love, our hope to learn, our hope to procreate, our hope to harvest, etc.
And the hope is not too utopian, because all we have to do is follow the law. Is that part of your point?
Yeah, so at least if we did that, we wouldn't lose hope.
Yeah.
Which many of us are losing.
Very, very good. No, I like that. I wasn't clear exactly what you were driving at. I got a bar mitzvah in 10 minutes, and you know my fear is I'll get there and they'll have already started. And that would not be a good thing.
Are you going to continue this theme next week?
Definitely.
Oh, good.
We're continuing. We've got a lot to do still on this. Very rich theme, isn't it?
Yes, it's wonderful.
Yeah. Okay, I'll see you next week. Shabbat shalom.
It was fascinating. Bye-bye.
30 seconds.
What? I don't think that's up. Chief Rabbi Like what else? Michael. I don't see that.
always stop. Or they can just say, no, we're not doing whatever he throws in. They have to pass. So that argument,
Yeah.
that's a
When I see, Mitch McConnell seems to be on the shots,
yeah,
but for a while,
yeah.
and then that fits.
Exactly.
Well, the Congress did do their job,
So my point is that,
which, especially with the border thing right now, they've ignored the